What's up everybody, it's Kimberly. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to tell you a very scary, horrifying story about the time I thought that I was going to die. If you're easily scared or certain things freak you out, I would suggest turning off this video because this is about a time that was truly traumatizing where I really thought that my life and my baby Cassie's life were in extreme danger. And at the risk of sounding over dramatic, this is by far one of the worst things that have ever happened to me in my entire life. Guys, I have held off telling you this story for a really long time because it is very personal, but I think it is something that I want you to know about because it's a part of who I am. And I've actually heard that it is very common for people to go through what I went through. So my experience is not unique, and I feel like it's good for you kind of know what's up. Guys, I'm so pregnant. I'm getting so big now. So big. I'm nervous. So this story all happened the night after I gave birth to Cassie. So to set the stage for you guys, I want you to feel like you were in the situation with me. When I was 40 weeks pregnant with Cassie, I was 2 days before my due date, and I started going into labor at around 5:30 a.m. I spent the entire day in labor before I was actually admitted to the hospital later that night. As soon as my water broke around 4 p.m., I was in like the worst pain of my life. I was crying, I was throwing up after every contraction because of the pain. So we made it to the hospital, and the next 12 hours of my life are literally a blur. All I can remember is crying and screaming and throwing up in between contractions, and then getting stuck at 8 centimeters dilated for 5 hours. I needed to make it all the way to 10 before I could start pushing. I can only compare that experience of labor to someone getting like tortured, because it's kind of like non-stop pain, the worst pain you've ever experienced in your life, and nothing you can do about it. It just keeps continuing. So after around 24 hours of labor, I started to give up and cry because I thought I wasn't going to be able to do it. And the midwife said that the baby's heart rate was slowing down and that my heart rate was slowing down too. So they needed to give us something called oxytocin, and they needed to give me an epidural, which would speed up the labor. So I got the epidural and the pain almost instantly went away. It made me wonder, like, why would anyone do this or try to do this without an epidural? Like, I spent the next 5 hours resting, and then the next 2 to 3 hours after that pushing the baby out. And so finally, after 32 hours of labor, our little baby precious Cassie was born, and Nathan and I were so excited.
Oh, honey. Oh, I'm so happy.
And after that long of a labor with no food, no water, no sleep, I was so glad and relieved that it was finally over. Or at least so I thought. And now we're getting to the super scary, horrifying part. The midwives, who I love so much, spent about an hour cleaning me up and measuring the baby and just doing all of the required measurements. And then they escorted us to our semi-private room at the hospital. I'm not going to say what hospital this is because I feel like it was a horrible experience. So when we got to what was going to be my hospital room, we found out that 10 of my family members had already been admitted into my room ahead of me. So what that meant was that there was no time for me to go and like wipe the smudged makeup and the tears off my face, clean the poo off my hospital gown, or even like have a minute to myself with the baby. I basically walked straight into a photo shoot with my family members. At this point, I was wearing a diaper and a hospital gown, and it was my second day going without eating or drinking water. So while my aunts and uncles were taking photos of me, I started to realize that I was actually physically starving. I needed food. I also wasn't able to walk yet. So I asked Nathan if he could ask one of our family members if they would go and get me something to eat from the hospital food court. In response to that, we actually got some attitude from our family because they really wanted to just spend time with the baby, and they were a bit annoyed that they had to go and get me food. I think they honestly just didn't realize that I had just been through like a 32-hour ordeal, a labor, and they weren't really thinking about what it must have felt like to be me in that moment. So over the next few hours, from 5 to 8, I got more visitors, including Mitch and Greg, which was really fun. And even a nurse came by who helped give Cassie her very first bath. This is where the actual horror story begins for me. Around 9 p.m., everybody was asked to leave. Visiting hours were over, and even though Nathan was allowed to stay, technically there was no bed for him, so his parents convinced him that he'd be better off just going back home and sleeping in his own bed. To which I was terrified because I didn't want Nathan to leave me alone in the hospital room. I knew I needed time to rest and recover, but I hadn't imagined spending my first night with a newborn alone with them in my hospital room overnight. So that left me alone in my hospital room for the next 8 hours, completely sleep deprived and without access to food and no water. And this is the part I'm never gonna forget. Right before I tried to get some sleep, a nurse came up to me and said, Don't forget to set your alarm for every 2 hours because you're gonna need to wake the baby up and feed her. This was the most terrifying thing for a new mom to hear because I honestly felt, after being awake for 2 days straight with no food and no water, I did not think I was going to be able to wake up with an alarm. I thought somehow I would miss feeding the baby and that she was going to die. I barely slept at all. So in an 8-hour time span, only one person came to my hospital room to check on me, and that was to check the baby's vitals. And while this nurse was there, I mustered up the courage to ask her if she knew where I could get some water because I felt like I was dying of thirst. So instead of getting me some water or helping me get some, she pointed to the door and said, "There's a water station at the other end of the ward, so you can go get yourself some water there." So even though I hadn't tried walking on my own yet and I could barely walk, and I was still wearing a hospital gown that was completely open at the back with a diaper on, I knew that I needed water more than I needed anything. So I picked up Cassie and I walked by myself with her in my arms to the water station, and the whole process took roughly 10 minutes. Guys, I thought I was gonna die because I was so drugged up and so shaky and so exhausted and so sleep deprived that I thought I was gonna fall or that I was going to drop the baby and that she would die. This process of getting water was the most scary thing I have ever gone through. Like, I don't even remember seeing anybody there. By 6 a.m. the next morning, I was officially in like 10 times worse shape than I was the night before when I went to bed. Now, I had not slept and my body was not recovering and I still hadn't eaten food. When a random nurse came to check on me, I mustered up the courage to tell her how rough the night had been and how hungry I had been and how much I really needed water and what I did to go and get that water. So she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Well, you could have called." I had no idea what she was talking about, but it turns out that there was a button underneath my bed that I could have pushed at some point during the night and that someone would come, but nobody had taken the time to actually show me that there was a button there and tell me that I could use it if I needed help. So guys, it just keeps getting worse. By the time my family and even more visitors arrived the next morning around 8 a.m., I was still in my hospital gown with the poo on it, with my open back, with the diaper and the makeup smeared all over my face, all of that because I still at that point hadn't had the strength to change myself. I'm almost in tears right now just telling you this, but I've never felt so alone in my entire life. Guys, it's really crazy because being a mom, being a new mom is supposed to be like full of joy and one of like the best experiences of your life. But for me, I was so scared and I felt so neglected by the hospital and even the people in my family because they didn't know what was going on. Like, they didn't really know what I needed, that the whole experience for me was just plain scary. It was terrifying. I did end up getting discharged from the hospital less than 24 hours after I gave birth, which makes me cringe actually, because my labor was 32 hours. Like, 24 hours was not even close to enough time for me to actually somewhat feel recovered. I'd slept less than 3 hours in a 60-hour period, which is roughly 2.5 days. And at the time I left, I still couldn't walk, so the hospital had to lend me a wheelchair just to get to the car. Guys, I know this is weird, but I think that honesty is the best policy and that by being open about these experiences, we can prevent them from happening to other people and even ourselves. I honestly wish someone had been more honest with me about the pain of childbirth and also about that experience that I would have after trying to deal with family and advocate for myself in a hospital environment. I was not at all prepared for that, so I hope by making this video I didn't scare you guys into thinking that your experience would be the same way, but rather, if there is something that you need, there's usually somebody you can ask for help. And you might have to ask a few times, but you can usually get what you need and you don't have to suffer all by yourself like I did. You know what? In the end, I got an amazing baby, an amazing daughter, and I'm really excited to be welcoming an amazing son into this world as well. So as bad as it was, and even though my experience was the worst one out of all my friends and family, I still decided to do it again. So that does say a lot about how you can recover emotionally from something and put trauma behind you and be able to go into it again with a new attitude. So I definitely feel more positive about that this time around. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I will see you next week for another video all about relationships. Bye.